Why did the home front of the United States have such a big impact on the outcome of the war? People living on the home front put great efforts into helping the men at war. The women took it upon themselves to take over the jobs that the men had left behind. Some began working in the factories, while others took over their husband or son's farming responsibility. The government put Japanese Americans into camps in order to protect the people of the United States from being attacked or spied on. They also had all Americans begin rationing and held drives for whatever the men needed at war. The efforts on the home front greatly affected the outcome of World War II. According to the Minnesota Historical Society in 2011, women felt that their participation was necessary for an Allied victory. Since men were the only ones who usually worked in factories and on the farms, and were also the only ones allowed to fight in the war, the gender roles had to be altered until the war was over. As men filled the positions as soldiers, industry jobs were filled with women. According to Penny Coleman, the author of Rosie the Raventeer, over 6 million women were in the workforce during World War II. After Pearl Harbor, 750,000 applied for factory jobs, but only 80,000 were actually hired because it was believed that women couldn't do the job as well as men. Women also took on other responsibilities. They ran farms, planted crops, tended animals, and harvested fruits, vegetables, and grains. Women who did not take over the position of their husbands or son decided to join the military. Women were not necessarily wanted in the United States military draft, but thousands of women responded to America's needs for soldiers. Over 200,000 women volunteered for the armed forces and 143,000 served in the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, which was eventually shortened to the Women's Army Corps, or just the WWII. Women who chose not to serve in any of the women's group or work for pay decided to join the war efforts as unpaid volunteers. The most popular women volunteer groups were the Red Cross and the Office of Civilian Defense. Women who volunteered their time to the Red Cross served as nurses, aides, or ambulance drivers, and those who worked with the civilian defense ran canteens where servicemen could get a meal for free. Others who were with the civilian defense were air raid wardens, fire watchers, messengers, drivers, and auxiliary police. In 1980, according to Don Lawson, the author of an album of World War II home fronts, right after Pearl Harbor, many people on the West Coast became afraid of Japanese Americans living among them. They were afraid that they were spies. When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, around 112,000 Japanese Americans were living in California, Arizona, and on the coast of Oregon and Washington. J.M. Brown, a member of the Yale New Haven Teachers Institute, stated in 2011, "Acceptance of the ISI, first-generation Japanese immigrants as first as cheap labor by the citizens, changed over the years to resentment, racial hatred, mistrust, and discrimination." Answering to the pressure of the West Coast, the government and the Western Defense Command decided to remove all Japanese Americans from the coastal areas. President Franklin Roosevelt issued the Evacuation Order 9066 on February 19, 1942. It stated that any Japanese American could be taken from a designated area by the Secretary of War or any other military commanders. General DeWitt of the Western Defense Command reinforced his feelings by explaining, as quoted by the Los Angeles Times on April 4, 1943, "A Jap is a Jap. It makes no difference whether he is an American citizen or not. I don't want any of them. They are a dangerous element. There is no way to determine their loyalty." Because of the evacuation order and the demands of the West Coast and the Western Defense Command, the United States government moved as many Japanese Americans as possible into camps that became known as relocation centers. The Japanese Americans remained in the camps throughout the war. The relocation centers were actually harsh military-style camps surrounded with barbed wire located in barren and isolated areas scattered throughout western states. Early in the war, Roosevelt set up the Office of Price Administration and Civilian Supply Management, later shortened to the OPA. His goal was to keep prices from rising because of all the shortages across the United States. All foods were rationed through a system of points. Foods that were in less demand had fewer points. During the war, Americans were given war ration books that contained pages of stamps. These books controlled how much of each product that a person could purchase. The stamps were usually allowed to be used within a month of receiving them, although they could be canceled at any point in time. A few of the foods that were rationed were sugar, coffee, canned goods, butter, and meat. Because of the shortage of vegetables and fruit, Americans were asked by the government to plant victory gardens. By the end of the war, there were over 2 million victory gardens. These gardens were producing 1/3 of the nation's vegetables. As World War II continued, gasoline, rubber, and heating oil began to get rationed. Gasoline was decreased by 20% on the East Coast. Alcohol was still available, but in small amounts because it was needed to make explosives. Americans got used to seeing signs and posters with the words, "Use it up, wear it out, make it do, or do without." The cost of the war was overwhelming. Because of this, the government created war bonds. Each war bond was worth $18.75. By the end of the war, it was supposed to be worth $25. Americans started using a little bit of every paycheck to purchase war bonds. Throughout World War II, 8 major war bonds were held by the government. Throughout the war, people on the home front of the United States never gave up on their soldiers. From the rationing of goods and war bonds, to women in factories and rubber drives, the goal of the people was accomplished, an Allied victory. Although women were not the only people on the home front, they are responsible for keeping the homes and farms running. By putting the Japanese Americans in camps, the government was able to protect everyone in the United States from being attacked or spied on. The efforts of the people on the home front greatly affected the outcome of World War II.